It all started about a month ago. It was the 30 days of fasting and we were on day 20. My friends and I always got dragged somewhere with our parents, kind of at a mosque, which was a Muslim equivalent of a church, where all the adults hang out upstairs after breaking their fast and the little kids mess around in the basement. My friends and I were pretty damn bored because we didn't have much to do at that point. But then one of my friends, let's just call him Sean, suggested that we should go check out this abandoned kindergarten. At first I was pretty hesitant about it, because if we got caught, our parents wouldn't live it down. Nonetheless, I decided to go. The downside was that it was pouring rain and the streets were shimmered with cars. We went to Sean's house, which was right near the mosque, to get his backpack full of flashlights and to get some food. Our friends decided to wash out in the end. It was just Sean and me. It took 10 minutes of walking in the pouring rain, but we got to the kindergarten. The outer parts of it were creepy. There was a lot of trash surrounding it and the door seemed openable. Sean went up the stairs to get into the front entrance. The entrance was stairs on both sides, so I went to the left and checked out the windows. I shined my flashlight through there and started to look through it. The first thing I noticed were all of the stuffed animals. They were arranged in a weird pattern, almost spelling out a V. The window was locked tight, so I got down, and Sean gave me the sign that the front door was locked. We eventually resorted to checking out the entrance under the stairs and noticed that it wasn't locked. The locks on it were broken off, and we found a knife on the ground. It didn't look like a kitchen knife or a switchblade, more so like a butter knife. I had a really weird feeling in my stomach about this, and I suggested that we head back. Sean agreed, so we both put the flashlights back in the bag, and we were starting to walk back when we heard a noise. It sounded like heavy footsteps walking down, so we both decided to hide in the corner between the stairs and the railing. We dropped the bag and immediately stayed silent. The guy was wearing a dark gray hoodie with the hood up. The glimpse of his face showed that he had a small beard and long hair slicked back. He seemed skinny, but he was wearing baggy clothes, so it was hard to tell. His sweatpants seemed slightly too big, and he also kept his hands in his pockets. Sean and I were very uneasy, but we stayed dead silent. The guy paced around where we were, but eventually saw our bag on the ground. We were approximately 10 feet apart, but he didn't know we were there. Immediately, Sean signaled with his finger to the left, where we could run and be back in the mosque in about 5 minutes. We both knew the way there, but we were pretty damn scared. The guy eventually took the bag and was about to head inside the kindergarten, so we got ready to run. We heard the door close and we waited for about a minute before moving. We slowly went down the stairs and were about to cross the street when we heard a guy say in a very loud voice, "The rain feels pretty good, huh?" We looked back and saw the guy with a knife at his side. This time his hood was up, so you could only see the smirk on his face. He was still at the door of the front entrance, so we booked it. Dear God Almighty, I'm thankful to my track coach. The guy still had the book bag, but we were just lucky to get away. We didn't see the guy anywhere and eventually made it back. We dried off with towels in the mosque bathroom and took our jackets off. Sean said he didn't mind losing the bag or flashlight since they were old ones that he had lying around. The only downside is, it was his school book bag. It still might have his name and address on there, so hopefully that bearded man that had a knife doesn't come and try to find us. Back around 2000, we saved a life. Followed back to a couple of years before when I met a cop at 3:15 a.m. He was cool and let me go. I was working in a warehouse 45 minutes away and getting into college. I took on a job about 45 minutes away from home at a food distribution warehouse. The pay was good and the hours were fun, ending at 2:30 a.m. or later. Living in a very rural area, I'd safely blow the stop sign. A cop was watching the next day and flicked on the emergency lights around 3:30, when there was no one else around. Simply gave me a couple of names of those who screwed me over, then he let me go. Long night. Second time around, I went out with a friend, smoked a little doob on a back road, and got pulled by the same cop. I showed him the road after recognizing him, then it was all good. A few months later, a couple of friends and I went out to the fairgrounds, a very rural area. We smoked a large doobie. We made the decision to take the long way around, cool out, and enjoy the time. We left the parking lot, then just down the road was some debris, in which I tried to stop, but I ended up running over it. So I turned around and walked out to remove the debris so no one else would run over it. Then my friend said, "Dude, there's someone down there." I nearly crapped my pants. He was nearly 12 feet in this ditch, covered in blood, holding a dead flashlight. Upon inspection, there was a 12-pound sledgehammer sitting right beside the accelerator and serving gear through the windshield, just inches from his head. It appeared that he had traveled through the ditch about 200 feet before crashing into 2 trees. We pulled him out of the ditch and called 911. There was no way around. If I didn't decide to go the other way, he may have died. It was cold. Guess what? That same cop showed up and told him exactly what we were doing. The next day, my friend at the incident had diabetic shock, right beside the guy we pulled out of the ditch.
My story begins in 2010. I was a little shit and I had one brother. My parents were going through a divorce at the time while my mom was having an affair. With me being 6, I had no idea, so of course I never told my parents. Well, I woke up and turned on the TV. I was bored and eating cereal when my dad came in the living room with his hands over his face. When I looked back on it, his voice was shaky. I failed to mention earlier that I had a very small Pomeranian. In case you don't know what a Pomeranian is, it's a dog that looks like a little bit bigger than a Chihuahua. My dad asked me to take the dog outside and walk it. I got excited because in the past, my dad never let me take the dog out by myself. My parents worked a lot, so I went to a babysitter a lot. Well, my brother was spending the night at my babysitter's house, so I was alone with my mom and my dad. My mom was inside. I went over to the neighbor's house and sat underneath their tree. I wasn't allowed to, but I knew my parents would come and spend time with me when I did. They never came. I sat for maybe 20 minutes. Then I heard what sounded like somebody knocking on a door. That's when I realized it wasn't a door. My 6-year-old self thought nothing was happening. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. Maybe the side door. It was locked too. I started to get shaky. What if my parents forgot about me? I started banging on the door as hard as I could, with no answer. So I went to my neighbors for help. When I told them what happened, they called the police. They were acting very scared. They sent me to their guest bedroom and would not let me out. The room was completely empty. A policeman came and took my statement. I said I heard 2 door knocks and a knock on the wall. I was trying to get in, but I couldn't get in. He shook his head, and this policewoman came and took me to McDonald's. I remember her being very beautiful. Well, after that, I was taken to my babysitter's house. After maybe a year, my grandma tried to adopt me, but died of heart problems after losing the court case. I do not remember her name, thus not having that police report. What happened to my parents was that my dad shot my mom and then committed suicide. I'm not trying to be like, whoa, but I just had to tell it. Thanks for listening. This happened a few years ago when I was about 23. I live walking distance of the mall and don't drive, so I walk to and from the mall a lot. One night, I left the mall, and right outside was a man who had just been in a fight. He was yelling at someone and said that he was going to get his son to kill the man. I'm pretty sure he was very drunk, and not the fun kind of drunk. The I better not upset him or who probably hurt me kind of drunk. He approached me and continued talking about how he was going to get his son to kill the man he was fighting with. He followed me down the street while telling me delusional stories about he was the richest man in the world. I am not convinced the son of he spoke is this. When we got to his house, he invited me in for a beer. I probably should have said no, but I feared he would keep following me. I wanted to be rid of him, so I figured if I just had one beer and went on, he might leave me alone. So, and what probably went against all better judgment, I went right inside his house. The inside of his house was very sketchy. There was a mattress in the middle of the living room floor, and there was a coffee table with a dozen empty beer bottles and some weed on it. I'm pretty sure the man was drunk, high, and mentally ill. I watched him open a beer for me, so I'm fairly certain it wasn't poisoned. He also offered me weed, but I declined, since I've never smoked weed and don't know how it would affect me. Beer, I figure, was safe enough considered I normally drink vodka. My plan was to finish one beer and get out of there. The man asked me if I had a boyfriend. I truthfully said no, but immediately realized the smart thing would have been to pretend that I had a tough and very jealous boyfriend. I came to my senses and made up that I had a protective brother waiting for me at home. The man offered to be my boyfriend. I declined, claiming something about how my brother wouldn't like that. At one point, the man said he was going upstairs to get something and for me to wait. At that point, I was certain I was about to be murdered. I did not finish my beer. I laid it down and insisted I had to leave immediately before my brother got worried. I got out as fast as I could, ran home, and thanked God that I live in a building with a door that locks automatically. I never interacted with that man again. I'm not entirely sure which house he lived in. I sometimes see him walking down the street talking to himself. At one point he came close and I got scared, but he didn't seem to notice me and went to talking to himself. Now, when walking home at night, I talk to my mom on the phone so that it's clear that someone knows where I am, and hopefully, no creeps try to make a move on me.
I had to learn the hard way that not all companies do a complete background check on new employees. About 10 years ago, I was working at a group home for 5 high-functioning mentally disabled gentlemen. Each of the men are assigned direct care staff to help out with everyday life outside of work and when they are at home in the evenings. The men range from a little over 21 to early 50s. These men are unable to properly feed themselves or live in a normal life outside of assistance. Only one of the younger men, Doug, needed assistance with the shower, since he was the lowest functioning. Tommy was a short, hairy, squat man in his late 30s, with inappropriate comments to female direct care staff. Walter was in his early 40s, had the tendency to lie, a touch of a rare temper, and enjoyed winding up the other clients. Rick chainsmoked like a demon, lied a lot, had a small temper too. Then there is Roland, over 6.5 feet tall, gangly, violent toward all females and known to tear out hair. Each of the gentlemen have their own bedrooms, for those curious. 3 years into the job, a guy named Corey was hired. We all discovered he had his sick wife at home, and he seemed pretty nice. I did nothing to encourage him, but it wasn't long before Corey was trying to keep our clients in the same rooms to talk to me. I got the creeps. Then, I asked for an opposite schedule of his own. He still worked shifts with me despite the request. Then, he started stalking me to the grocery store that turned out to be near his apartment. After a few days of his being there after our shifts ended, I was wigged out. One evening, he followed me home completely before I realized he had. I reported the incidents, and it wasn't taken seriously. I bleached my hair to a pale white the day before a huge meeting for work, and kept my head down. I had told Allie and another close coworker about it, but was believed by them because the idiot was asking where I was at the meeting. He finally spots me and tries to engage in a convo after the meeting, and I told him I had to assist the manager. He brushes it off until Allie told him about how Corey just followed me to the van with Rick, even though Corey wasn't on duty. Corey was immediately pulled aside and explicitly told to leave me alone. Thankfully, they started listening, but it was too late in many ways. Corey's behavior toward me pressed the managers to look further into his past. It was discovered that for the year prior, he did time for raping a 17-year-old girl. To make matters worse, He had been corrupting the clients during trusted graveyard shifts in the house for months. He subjected Roland, Rick, and Walter to some hardcore pornography. He was fired shortly after. Last I knew, he was on the loose. He lives a state away, but I wish there was more distance. Roland became more violent with female direct care staff after the exposure and began to corner me after the pornography exposure from Corey. This led to my barely getting into the bathroom before Roland was able to tear at my long hair. I had to climb out the window, demanded the assigned staff get their client, and put my notice in the next day.
This story happened to me long ago when I was 10 years old. This story happened in a small town in the leafy suburbs north of New York City in Westchester County. It didn't happen at my house, but at the house of one of my good friends at the time, about a walking block away from where I lived. This is one of those towns in Westchester where there are huge suburban houses set among oak and maple trees. It was a safe neighborhood where I knew the owners of each house by name. The houses were generally quite large, with multiple floors and several bedrooms. The house where this scary story takes place was extra large. It was not the shining hotel large, but it was a large colonial house with 5 bedrooms on the second level. The family living there had 5 children ranging from 10 to the upper teenage years at the time. The night that this happened on was a dark, cold night. The parents were out with dinner plans that evening, and I was there visiting my friend Byron, who was also 10, and his other brother Jacob, who was 12. It was just the 3 of us in one large house that night during October. I knew this family quite well, so I felt very at home in their home. We were just scooping around that night, playing some games and watching TV. 3 kids in a large empty house, what could go wrong? So this is where the night becomes creepy. The 3 of us were in the kitchen with the lights on bright. It was around 11:30 at night. So it was late, but not super late. The phone rang, and Jacob, acting as the head of the household at 12 years old, answered, "Hello." We then saw Jacob get a peculiar look on his face and hesitantly said, "Just a minute," and then did something a bit odd. He rested the phone on the chair. This was one of those wall phones from the 1990s. I didn't think people still used those in 2018. In any case, he put the phone down and just left it and walked upstairs. I remember thinking it was a strange thing to do, but it could have some reasonable explanation. I looked at Byron, and he also looked curious, and kind of had a WTF type of expression on his face. We were quiet for a few seconds, and both our facial expressions showed signs that we thought this was peculiar and odd. In a few moments, Jacob is going to be running down the stairs in a panic, screaming for us all to immediately get out of the house. But before we get to that part, here's what happened upstairs. Jacob climbed the stairs and went into his parents' room, where there is a phone on the tabletop. This is one of those old corded phones, where you pick up the receiver and hold it to your ear. Not exactly an iPhone 10, and there was no way to know who is calling. Jacob picked up the phone and said, "Okay, I'm upstairs, what's up?" A few moments went by with dead silence, and Jacob asked, "Hello?" The voice came. It was calm but cold. "Jacob, there's a bomb inside your house, and it's going to blow up any second now." The other end hung up. He dropped the phone and felt panic and rush through his body. He ran out of the bedroom, down the stairs, and started screaming to get out of the house. "There's a bomb in the house! There's a bomb in the house!" We saw Jacob at the bottom of the stairs running. He did not waste any time, heading straight for the foyer, and outside, and down the stone path that leads away from the house and out to the streets. Byron and I ran outside with confused fury also. Jacob stopped running when he arrived at the side of the corner of the street on the sidewalk. We looked across the street at the huge house, looking very eerie on the dark night. The house had several lights on and the front door was open, and it was empty. There was no one around. The neighborhood was still and quiet. It was just us, 3 kids, the oldest 12-year-old, standing there on a cold October night at almost midnight, scared out of our wits and waiting for the house to burst into fire. I was feeling chills through my body and chills on my skin from the dark, cold air. Our jackets were inside, and we could just go get them so easily, but thought the house could blow up at any second. Jacob explained what had happened on the phone. He said that he thought it was Uncle Jerry, but now didn't think it was his Uncle Jerry. It was bizarre that the caller knew he answered on the ground floor and told him to go upstairs. How could he know this? We thought that maybe he told Jacob to go upstairs so that he wouldn't have enough time to get out of the house before the possible explosion. We stood there, we waited, and we were scared, and we were cold. We thought the large, boxy, empty, illuminated house on this dark night would soon be in flames. That there was a chance that it would be in flames. But it never blew up. But we were still afraid to go inside because maybe it would blow up then. Eventually, we went to the neighbor's house. The father there didn't seem as scared as we were, but he did call the police. The police searched through the house, and Byron and Jacob's parents also arrived home. I see the whole thing was some kind of practical joke, a prank call or something. We never found out who made the phone call, and Jacob to this day still has no idea who could have been. He still says at first he thought it was a friendly call from their uncle. There were a few pranksters in the neighborhood. Actually, we were amongst the biggest pranksters in the neighborhood. Still doesn't explain how the caller knew where Jacob was at the time that he called. Who would do a prank that is so sinister to a few vulnerable kids home alone on such a night?
When me and my troublesome friends were 13 years old, one of the mischievous things that we did was every Saturday night go to play ding-dong ditch. 10 years ago, we lived at the same block in a little suburban neighborhood. At the time, there was a lot less houses and a lot more woods. For privacy, I'm going to change my friends' names. There was Mark, James, and Matt. Mark and James were the ones to go and knock on the doors, and me and Matt were the ones that would usually go hide. We hit 5 or 6 houses that I remember, that all the men that answered the doors gave pretty much the same reactions. They stepped up into the stoop or yelled for a bit. One guy yelled that he was calling the cops, so we ran out of there as fast as we could. As I mentioned 10 years ago, in this neighborhood, there were patches of woods where the house stand today. On the next block over there were patches of wood surrounding some of the houses. The houses on this block seemed to be more unkempt than the first houses on the block that was across the street. This was perfect for a hiding spot. This house was kind of run down with tall grass and a ratty old car with a cover on it in the driveway. Overall, just a small house. Mark went to ring the doorbell. He barely made it across before a man about 6 feet tall with a stocky build came out of the house. He wouldn't like the other guy. This guy was angry immediately. He walked around his whole yard checking the bushes, screaming threats. We all laughed as we did, and he eventually went inside. Mark waited a few more minutes, checked the windows, and then went up to the porch and rung the doorbell again. I didn't feel jealous with this house. I would not be bold enough to ring that man's door again. The door opened more quickly this time, and the man came out with a rifle. We all looked at each other with a face that said, "Oh shit," under our breaths. The man checked the same places as before, and a few other ones. This time, like behind his car, behind the trees, and then he went into his lawn and just stood there for a few moments. Pasted, and the guy started staring in our direction. We were scared shitless. We ducked and hoped that he didn't see us. After 10 minutes of staring, he went inside his house and started looking out the window, standing there like a statue, looking in our direction once again. We saw Mark creeping to the man's front door, and there was nothing we could do. We were too afraid to move or yell at him. Mark rang the doorbell once again, and the man didn't move for at least another minute. He turned away and walked away from the window. We didn't see Mark. We were too nervous to say run or anything. Next thing I know, I remember we heard Mark's voice yelling across the street, yelling, "Run!" We didn't understand at first until we heard someone running up from behind us, realizing upon turning our heads that it was the man from across the street pointing his rifle at us. We ran like prey from a predator. To Mark, who was waiting for us across the street, we heard a gunshot and one of the bullets hit a tree that was right next to us. We lost our shit and we ran as fast as we could. We seemed to have lost him. Mark explained that when he yelled, he saw the man sneaking across the street into the patch of woods with his gun. We didn't report him or anything because we were too scared. We luckily left that house and never messed with it again though. Every time I think about this story, it still gives me nightmare. But I know that I'm never going ding-dong ditching ever again. I was about 12 years old. I was out trick-or-treating with my younger brother and my mom. My mom was following us but letting us go ahead of her just a little bit, about half the length of a street of distance between us. We get to a block where there aren't any houses lit up with lights or decorations, so it's very dark when we hear a man calling kids over to him. He was overweight, probably around 30 years old with long hair, wearing a black t-shirt, a black baseball cap and jeans. I remember getting serious creepy vibes from him, but shrugging it off since Halloween's creepy anyways. He wasn't standing in front of a house, just on the sidewalk. He wasn't telling anyone Happy Halloween or anything at all. Just stood there silently the entire time. He had a brown paper bag and was handing out what we presumed to be candy. So we approached him and opened our bags and he dropped some in. He must have run out quickly because after serving a small group of kids after us, he left quietly. When we got home, we dumped all of our candy out onto the floor and noticed that we had somehow received some type of homemade candy wrapped in a black electrical tape. I opened one and it was clear, melted looking and sticking to the tape. It looked so odd that we threw it away. After a few weeks later, it had come out in the news that parents had been reporting their kids getting sick after eating homemade candy laced with GHB from Halloween. They didn't know who gave it to them, but I think I do. If only I knew the guy's face or the guy's name. I have had a few strange experiences in my 16 years of life, and I would gladly share some of them, but this is the first encounter of the two with this entity. So, this happened to me when I was pretty young. When I tell people about how old I was when this occurred, they're shocked that I could still even remember it, but they usually don't believe me. I was 3, and I know what you're thinking, but I remember this clear as day. And a few years ago, when I asked my mom about it, because I'd always just thought it was some weird dream, but it was so vivid that it stuck with me even now. But my mom told me that it actually happened, and I'm seriously freaked out. As a child, I would tell everybody who listened about this thing I saw, referring it to as Bad Mommy, because at the time the thing had such a striking resemblance to my mom. Anyway, on to the experience. Like I said, this happened when I was 3, and to give some backstory, I just lived with my mother. We lived in a very small trailer-like home, in the living room and kitchen in one area with a long hallway that led to a master bedroom bathroom. We had no electric heating, only a plug-in furnace thingy in my mom's room. Anyway, I was wandering around the house, doing things 3-year-olds do, I guess. I don't really know how to explain that. My mom wasn't around, so I decided to go to her room, which is at the end of the dark hallway. The walk to her room seemed long, probably because I'm waddling like a penguin, and I remember not being able to see anything. But I hear something, like a drip drop, almost as if something was dripping on the hard wood. But I kept walking again. Drip drop. But this time I hear something else. Chris. My name whispered behind me. To be honest, I don't remember getting scared, but thinking back, I should have been. At At first, I guessed that I thought it was my mom or something, because that height and body plus color length all matched my mom's, but the lady that was in front of me definitely wasn't my mom. A woman who appeared in front of me seemingly soaking wet. I was able to see her fairly clearly compared to everything else. She had long black hair covering most of her face and a long sleeve white nightgown that was dripping. Her skin seemed so pale, even in the dark it looked almost bluish green. I could hear the drip drop, and it was coming from her. She was soaking wet. My 3-year-old self asked, "Mommy?" Like, in a confused way. Thinking back, I'm scared shitless, but back then I was like, oh, a strange lady in my house. But Ozzy, she didn't make any sounds or anything after I called her mommy. She just looked happy, but oddly, she just kept looking down at me, which is one thing my 3-year-old self thought was weird, because people would usually pick me up or at least crouch down and talk to me. But anyway, the lady that was dripping wet smiled at me, if you could even call it that. I remember her smile so clearly. It was so creepy. It's probably the creepiest thing I've ever encountered till this day. But I smiled back, being the dumb kid I was, and being polite. Honestly, I don't know what happened after that. I think my mom came out of the room or something. Anyway, that was my first encounter with what I guess you could call a ghost.